Oh, we are live. Hi, Jeff. All right, good morning.
Morning.
We are looking at 2 Samuel chapter 21, first starting at verse 15 to the end of that chapter, and then a look at chapter 22 in 2 Samuel, which is basically, well, it's Psalm 18 all over again. But there's a few questions or a few points of discussion on that I thought we could look at. Sharing.
Yeah. Gotta have fun something.
We're going to talk a lot today about giants. Not the San Francisco Giants, not the New York Giants.
New York football Giants?
New York football Giants. Biblical giants.
Okay.
And metaphorical giants, and Andre the Giant. And, yeah, all those giants. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to read chapter 21, verses 15 to the end, and then we'll have some discussion on that, and then we'll get into chapter 22 here in a little bit. So 2 Samuel, chapter 21, verse 15. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. And Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, which is about 8 pounds, more or less, and who was armed with a new sword, said he would kill David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, "Never again will you go out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished." In the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob, or Gob, whichever you want. At that time, Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha. In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jar-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. In still another battle, which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He also was descended from Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shemiah, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were descendants of Rapha and Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. Well, which is an interesting phrase to end on, because David didn't kill a single one of them. But that's maybe a point for discussion as well. All right. Why are giants in the Bible? Why aren't they still around then? Why are giants in the Bible?
Aren't they still around?
The Giants are still on.
They are still around
Giants are
playing the NBA.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's occasionally there's a 9-footer, but generally, and I mean, one thing that, and just in case you're, I've got at the bottom of the handout, I've got a website, a link, which is just one of many articles about the biblical giants. Talks about where they appear and how they all might be related to it. Just was kind of interesting reading, I thought, if you want to look at that, into that a little further. in your copious leisure time. So I thought it was a good link to at least an introduction to the topic. But why are giants in the Bible, and why is it every time they're in there, they're generally seen as bad or evil? Or they're the enemies of Israel or whoever is being discussed in the Bible at the time. Why would that be? And I don't know the answer for sure, but as I was looking through this, I started, as you read through all the incidents of the giants in the Bible throughout the Old Testament, the universal thing with all of them is that they always lose. They always lose the battle. Eventually, when Moses sent the representatives of the 12 tribes to search out the promised land, and they came back and said, "Oh, we're like grasshoppers to them. There's giants in there." Well, so that was kind of a setback, and maybe look at, well, they're kind of winning that, but eventually they lost as well. They were defeated, over the course of events. So I started thinking about this in terms of the question the disciples asked Jesus in John chapter 9. It popped in my head, so I went with it, and I thought it was kind of maybe an interesting discussion. Yeah.
You said the giants always lose?
Yeah.
My brother says it's easier to fight someone bigger than you than it is to fight someone your own size.
Did he say why? Did he say why he thinks that?
Because the bigger you are, the slower you move.
Body surface areas increase too.
Okay, so you agree.
I agree.
Bigger
totally.
target, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Bigger target.
What does that do?
Yeah,
You're
Mark?
saying most of the
There's a
fight.
phrase in MMA that says, speed beats power every time.
That's true.
Speed beats power every time.
We didn't know you were a fan.
You never know
I
with
know that
Mark.
phrase. It's actually been around for years. but
Yeah.
So what we find out is what Mark's doing with his leisure time, and that Randy's been beaten up.
Gingerbread man runs very, very fast.
Yeah,
He can
correct.
circle back around.
Yeah, okay.
See, you've all blown my whole lesson. Let's move on to number 2. Anyway, and that's a valid point. I'm not going to deny that. But let's look at John chapter 9. As he went along, and this is referring to Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, and he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." So I was keen in on this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. Is that a good reason why the Bibles appear in the Bible, Rosemary?
Well, I think the slaying of giants in the Bible is a good example to us, even though we probably physically don't have giants to slay. We all have things in our life that are bigger than we can slay on our own, and we need God's help to do that. Just like these folks needed help to physically slay their giants.
Right. Yeah.
We all have our own giants.
Yeah, which is I wanted to ask a question. I want to do like an elementary school check here. Everybody needs to put their heads down on their desk or close your eyes. This is a legitimate question. I'm asking you to close your eyes or put your head down. And we talk a lot, and it's a common reference, I think, common metaphor. We always talk about whatever our giants are. What are your giants? What have you dealt with in your life? At so if to the extent you faced giants in your life, however you characterize a giant, has it, and you've overcome those giants, has it been, and if it's been an internal giant, if it's been a struggle within yourself versus a physical or an external giant, an illness, a bad work situation, raise your hand if the giants you have most struggled with have been internal giants. Just
It's internal.
means it's not, it's within, it's a spiritual battle. Yeah. Okay, and if your biggest battles have been external giants, raise your hand. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. You all confirmed what I thought would be the case. It's most, and this is not to say if you're the other side, I'm delegitimizing your concerns. But most people raise their hands on the internal struggles, on the internal giants. Now, we also face external giants, and we all know that full well. I thought that was kind of I thought that's how that would come out. But the giants are here. They've been around since Genesis chapter 6. When I better look it up because I won't remember, or I'll get it wrong. Genesis 6. Genesis 6, chapter 4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. Anyway, from there and beyond, there's this general consensus or this general thought that the Nephilim were giants, that they were, really just a race of giants. And then people say, well, if they weren't with Noah and his family, so weren't they all wiped out?
Right.
But then giants appear later on after the flood, and what's been pointed out as a key verse here is verse 4 in chapter 6. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. So however, and I don't know the answer to how you square that with everybody on earth except Noah and his family being wiped out, but that seems to be the case.
Well, either they were tall enough they could keep their head above the water, or the Nephilim doesn't necessarily mean a race of people. It means maybe a group of people who are oppressing others. It could be, if we were to put the oppressors in there instead of Nephilim, that we don't know exactly what it means.
Right.
The big oppressors were still on the earth after the flood.
Yeah.
Because the flood didn't wipe out sin.
Right.
It wiped out some sinners, but it didn't wipe out sin.
Right. Yeah. Good. It's, and again, I don't want to get into that too much, but the giants, whether they're literal giants or they are just giants to you and giants to me, whatever the situation is, they continue to be with us. So that we have this incident in this chapter, and obviously, it seems obvious when it talks about all these battles with the Philistines, and in this first incident talks about David going out to fight, and he becomes exhausted. Well, the obvious explanation is, well, this is occurring later in his life, and he's just old, and he doesn't realize how much it's going to affect his ability to fight. So he's actually out trying to fight this giant, and the giant is going to take advantage of this situation, and David just can't do it anymore. He just physically, however much he might want to, he's just physically unable to do that. And I know nobody in here has had that kind of feeling at any point in their lives in the last few years. And so Abishai, good old Abishai, he and Joab, they're very similar in a lot of ways. He's there, and he steps up, and he kills the I keep wanting to say kills the dragon, but that's not right. Kills the giant, which is just the kind of thing you would expect Abishai or his brother Joab to do. That's what the kind of thing that they're really good at, which is kind of a reminder to us. Well, before I get to that, and then again, then two other times there. Sibbecai the Hushathite kills another giant, then Elhanan kills another one, and then David's nephew kills the fourth one. So all these people are stepping up to fight the giants, to save David, to save Israel, to take care of what needs. And is that not just it's kind of an easy cliche, but is that not a reminder to all of us? That if you're able to surround yourself with people who will step up and be there for you, maybe that's a good idea to do that, to identify people you can count on, people who will step up for you, even without being asked, maybe they're able to recognize before you do yourself that they need to step up and help you out, that they will just do that without being asked. And is that not a reminder is that not what we're all here for with each other? We talk about people sitting at home watching church online. But James, said, well, but it's night. We need to be back together. We need to be there for each other because you have that community, and then you can develop a community around you of people who will step up with you and for you. And I don't think you get that online. Now, there are times when you need to do that. That's fine. But I think that's and I would agree with James and the staff here completely that they're trying to get people back into the building, back into a community. That's certainly carried out, borne out by this, that there are people. David is surrounded by people who will step up and do what needs to be done. Now. Parts of this incident also appear in 1 Chronicles chapter 20. And two of the names of the Israelites fighting are different. They're a little bit different. There's some question in some commentaries in verse 19 where it talks about Elhanan killing Goliath the Gittite. In 1 Chronicles, it's not Goliath the Gittite, it's Lami, who, and in some translations, he's referred to as Goliath's brother. So, there's different ways people have come up with different explanations for why the names are different translations. People making mistakes and transcribing names from one copy to another. There's all different reasons given why they might be different, but be that as it may, there's and another interesting theory I thought, they all talk about these giants are all related descendants of Rapha, and it's not clear whether Rapha is an actual specific person, or it may also be referring to the Raphaim, which is the plural form of that, which may be, again, a group of people, a race of giant, who we don't really know for sure. But they all seem to be related. And one commentator pointed out that, when David first faced Goliath, and he went and picked up some stones, he picked up 5 stones, but he only needed 1. Why did he pick up 5?
Backup plan.
Now, some of these giants they're pointed out as being related to Goliath. Were some of them there as well?
Interesting.
I don't know. I thought it was an interesting perspective that and there's 4 giants here plus Goliath. There's 5 of them, and he picks up 5 stones. I don't know. I thought it was kind of interesting. And that's a reminder. Be prepared. David was ready. If that's the case, David was ready for the worst. His worst case scenario. He was ready for it.
The interesting thing to me, the connection back to David and Goliath, was that Israel's armies were just scared to death of these folks. And you go back to the time of Joshua, and Joshua and Caleb were the ones who were saying, we need to go forward, we can defeat them with the Lord. And the rest of the Israelites were just scared to death of these folks.
Right.
And it seems like they're not afraid of them anymore. It seems like maybe they have progressed in their belief that if Joshua and in particular Caleb went into that area and wiped out a bunch of these folks, and then you get into David with Goliath, the young man at that point, or a young teenager at that point, who came and took down the giant, it seems like there is now this belief that we're not going to let them
Walk all over us.
walk all over us. If they push, we're going to fight back because we
Right.
have faith that the Lord's going to see us through.
Yeah. good
And it's
point.
different
That's a good point.
people. What is interesting to me is it's different people that's doing this now. It's not just Caleb, it's not just David, but it's a bunch of people that are inspired to go fight the giants.
Because they've seen it done, because David
Mhm.
has shown them the way. Yeah, Jeremiah?
Because David came in and showed them, oh, they're not so tough.
Yeah. Plus, essentially Randy was there also saying, well, the bigger they are, the easier it is going to be to beat them.
The bigger they are, the harder they
The
fall.
harder they fall, right?
Because, David had God on his side, but, the people of Israel, I guess their faith wasn't that strong at the time. So from their perspective, oh, wait a minute. These giants that we've been so scared of, their biggest one got taken down by a little kid. If he can do that, then what do we have to be afraid of?
Okay, so yeah, Liz.
Well, the other thing I'm wondering is in the culture at that time, they had to have explanations essentially for somebody that was out of the norm, if you will. So I could certainly see that culture seeing these people as gods or blessed by the gods or evidence of the gods because they bought into these other beliefs at times. So
Yeah.
I could easily see how they would interpret this person as having otherworldly powers because of their being.
Yeah.
And that in itself becomes into someone's head that they are greater, they are better, they have these powers that may not be evidence, but you hear rumors, right? And people believe into them, and so
Yeah.
therefore it becomes into a mindset.
Yeah, right. Yeah, once you get your mindset, once you start believing something, then it can be beneficial to you, or it can really hurt you. Bill?
Right.
What do you think the significance is of the actually putting it in about the 6 toes and the 6 fingers and 24 all?
Inbreeding.
Yeah, so.
Well, that might actually go back to Liz's point that maybe that they interpret that as a sign that he is some kind of special, uniquely powerful giant freak.
Yeah.
Polydactyly is not, it's not unheard of throughout history, but combine that with somebody who's 9 feet tall.
Polydactyly, so that's the medical term for 6 fingers or more than.
More than
Today,
normal
we
fingers or
always
toes.
That was
Pretty
a birth
intimidating.
defect.
Hmm?
Today, we might think that was a birth defect of some sort.
Well, yeah, people.
It is a birth defect, right? It's not
Yeah.
normal.
No, so there might be some other things going on, not only physical.
Yeah, could be. But I would say it lends to this aura he may have had of being some kind of uniquely powered person. It would be my best shot at it, I think. Certainly, it's rare enough that especially among giants, that it's noted in the Bible. It's considered to be worth noting. So anyway, so David has, through his example, or when he was a teenager, and I'm sure the story has been told, it's been transformed into a legend by this time, at this point in his life, that, and so it's not, it's not unknown among all of these of the Hebrew soldiers that you can kill these giants, with faith, well, God can kill these giants if you have, if we have the faith and you stand up to your giants, it can be done. So it works. Yeah, Heather.
It just reminds me that, and I kind of like Rosemary was saying, there's battles. We're all if we're not in a battle now, in some way we will be. I mean, that is life, problem solving. There's problems all the time. We're working through them. We're working through them in faith. But then it just reminds me that, here David was weak and he needed help at that moment. As we stumble, as we need encouragement, maybe it's our day to need encouragement and prayer. Maybe it's our day to be the one who will offer the prayer and encourage. That's sort of the power of the body of Christ in our Sunday school class, and being together and being, we can go through the battles that will happen in our lives and in our relationships.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and like you say, it works both ways. We need to work to develop a community around us that will be there for us. But then isn't there a responsibility that we do the same for everybody around us? That you be willing, you're prepared and you're willing, whether you're asked or not, if you see a need, to step up, to be there for somebody else, to be willing to say something or do something. And again, that goes right back to why there's a community within the church of people who are there for each other. But what if you feel all alone? What if you don't feel like there's somebody there with you? What if you're facing some kind of battle, and you don't feel like there's anybody else around? Do you look at, let's see, where am I?
God is always with us.
Do you look at Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6? I will never leave you or forsake you. Do you look at Psalm 118, verses 6 and 7? The Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Matthew 28, Jesus has promised his people, behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. We'd like to think we always have somebody with us, somebody beside us, but if we don't, I mean, we literally do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And maybe we tend to forget that sometimes, though, is the tendency to forget that however alone we feel, we actually aren't. Jeremiah?
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's relevant.
It is. Yeah, good. Yeah, and there are a lot of verses, a lot of what Jesus said that you could apply here just as well.
The immediate one that came to my mind was Joshua 1:9, but I don't know if that's the same thing. Be strong and courageous, do not be terrified.
Yeah, that fits in there too. There are a lot of.
It is, now that I think about it, because it says, it includes the words, the Lord your God is with you, wherever you go.
Yeah, right. You're right. And there are a lot of those verses throughout the Bible that are good reminders. And maybe that's another reason why we are encouraged to keep reading the Bible.
But we don't always
for learning, for support, for encouragement, for education, for a lot of reasons. So yes, Chris?
But I also think that's why it's important to connect with friends that are also Christians to give you encouragement, because when you're alone, those thoughts sometimes creep in when you're alone and desperate. But if you can call a friend or just, we have that advantage.
Yeah.
As church members or as the members.
Yeah.
we can reach out pretty easily. Whereas when you're alone and have no faith or have questions, sometimes you can turn to things that aren't very good. to
Right.
try to,
Right.
Desperation.
Yeah, right. Jeremiah?
Piggybacking off of what you said about surrounding yourself with Christian friends, that actually brings me back to a point I brought up in the previous class I was in. I feel like that's part of what church is for. Like, yes, we come to receive the word and hear the word, but there's also a certain fellowship to a church.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, people complain, oh, well, there's too many hypocrites in the church. I feel like you just have to ask God to give you guidance as to who to fellowship with. I feel like that's one of the benefits of the church.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah, there,
creating
yeah.
a community.
And I think, I think we all would agree, more and more these days, finding communities is harder and harder. Civic groups, school groups, church groups, maybe one of the last organizations left that where you can find a real community. Maybe that makes it even more important to be at the church, to be part of the community, and to try and because society and the culture is so fractured and us against them anymore. There's just even more of a need for a community that maybe than ever before. A group of people who will support you. And yeah, any organization, there are going to be hypocrites and people who aren't quite on the same page as you are. But is that not partly why you're in the community is to be able to point out in as kind and loving a way as you can where maybe they are hypocritical, maybe, and not to be harsh and say, oh, you're just a hypocrite, but and that's a challenge. How do you get people within your group to understand? How do you step alongside them and get them to understand where they might need to change their attitude or their behavior? That we could talk about that for hours. Go ahead.
I try to tell people sometimes a community isn't a batch of cookies. One bad egg doesn't spoil the batch.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It made sense in my head, but when I heard myself say it, I was like, that sounds kind of weird.
You're making sense today, Jeremiah.
Well, we're all hypocrites. We've all
Yes.
been there.
At some point, yes, you're going to. Mark's shaking his head.
No, I was gonna say the exact same thing. When people say there's some hypocrites in church, everyone who goes to church is a
Yeah.
hypocrite. As is everyone who doesn't go to
Yes.
church.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
the person who is most vociferous about pointing out hypocrisy in church is a huge hypocrite. It's
Yeah.
everywhere.
Right.
So just point it out about churchgoers.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Jeremiah.
Bishop Larry D. Grinstead of Puritan, my parents' church. He said that once. He preached about that. We all have a little bit of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And we can say to somebody that says they're all hypocrite, I've been there. I know what you're saying, because I know what a hypocrite is, because I've been there before.
I'm a hypocrite.
But here's how we can approach.
Right.
You've all had the disease.
We all get frustrated with people who judge, who think being a Christian means you think you're perfect. I don't,
Judge.
Holier than thou.
yeah. Becky?
I've shared this story before, so Steve Rennick.
That hypocrite.
He told the story of, he had a good friend that realized that Steve was the pastor here. So Steve was saying, hey, well, you ought to come and hear me preach sometime, since we're buddies. And then of course the guy said, well, church is full of hypocrites. So Steve slapped him on the back and said, that's okay, come on, we need some more. And he disarmed the guy and he came to church and he kept coming. And so, yeah,
Yeah,
I miss
Come on,
Steve.
one
That's-
more
yeah.
won't hurt.
why try and deny it?
It
It's just-
disarmed him, and he laughed, and then he came.
Good, that's a good story. We got off
Yeah.
off track, huh? That's
Leave it
never
to
happened
us.
before. Okay, so I think that wraps that up pretty well. It's not that long of a section, but this whole concept of facing giants, of being prepared to face giants, of knowing God has helped you defeat giants before. Does that not give you confidence that, there's more giants coming, but that doesn't mean it's hopeless, or doesn't mean God can't defeat more giants that come on down the road. So I guess that's kind of really what I wanted to get out of this, that whether it's literal giants or metaphorical giants, however unfair it is that sometimes we keep facing the same giant over and over again. And we have to keep fighting the same battle over and over again, but it can be done. So let's look at chapter 22. And like I say, this is almost identical to Psalm 18. And I want to look specifically here at verses 21 through 25 of chapter 22. I'm going to read those and then we'll have a little discussion. Verses 21 through 25 of chapter 22. 2 Samuel. Now let me back up a minute. Now, while this chapter 21 that we just looked at, in terms of where this is chronologically, the first part of that section seems to be when David's older and he gets exhausted, and it refers to different times. There was another battle with the Philistines, so we're not sure exactly when all these were happening. Presumably sometime later in David's life. Now, chapter 22 starts off, it says, David sang to the Lord the words of this song when the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul, which, that was a long time ago from where we picture ourselves as being chronologically here in David's life. So that's why I'm kind of interested in how verses 21 through 25 fit into this chronology. David says, the Lord has dealt with me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands, he has rewarded me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord. I have not done evil by turning from my God. All his laws are before me. I have not turned away from his decrees. I have been blameless before him and have kept myself from sin. The Lord has rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness in his sight. Which at first glance is kind of an odd thing for a guy who's done what David has done in the course of his life for that guy to be saying. Bill?
Unless he wrote it when he was 5 years old.
Right. Which is why, I wanted to look at it. I mean, it seems, the lead verse, the first verse in this talks about tying it way back to the days of Saul, before Bathsheba and before Absalom, before this and before that. And in terms of his, what's the word I want? His natural activities, things that he's just done himself, things that have happened in the course of his normal life. Maybe he still would think of himself as being righteous and clean and, and deserving of being rewarded by God. But it's hard to imagine a guy who's been through everything David went through the course of his life. How would he say that? How would he justify saying what he's saying here when he's 65 years old, for example? How would he justify that? How could you justify that, Chris?
It's almost like he already knows the Lord died for him. It's almost like a premonition in a way that he's already accepted the covering of the blood as a shield.
Mhm.
But I think he realizes that in God's eyes, with forgiveness, he has become perfect.
Mhm.
But he
Right.
had to lay all the sins before God and confess, and then he felt the purity afterwards. And then if he sinned again, he'd go back to the so-called cross. It's kind of interesting. It's almost like a foresight of the purity, the light. He talks about the light and darkness,
Mhm. Yeah.
that he's been purified.
Yeah, it's at one level, it's a hard thing to figure out. But if you think back, and we talked about this, I mentioned this 3 or 4 weeks ago. After David's affair with Bathsheba, and Nathan tells him, no, I think it's God tells him, says, "I'm going to consider you. I'm going to consider this like this all never happened." So is it that David has taken, I mean, he has really grasped onto that and has fully embraced his total forgiveness? Again, we don't know when he wrote this. If he wrote this later in life, it seems like he has to have fully accepted that he's been forgiven. And it's like he never did any of those things. Either this is early in life and he hasn't done any of that yet, or he's done it and he has fully accepted that he has been forgiven. And if that's the case, are we able to do that? Are you able to fully accept that you are forgiven for every stupid, sinful thing you've done? Are you able to, can you take that last step? It's hard to do, isn't it? You're scowling at me.
Well, we talked about this, and I had said, I was kind of like Chris, I'm like, David was somewhat prophetic in terms of, I mean, with the Psalms and things that he wrote. So it's almost like he is receiving something that he doesn't see.
Mhm.
And that he doesn't know Jesus will, with faith, somehow it's
Yeah.
like he's pulling something out that,
Uh-huh.
wow.
Well, we have Jesus to look on. He
Yeah.
didn't have Jesus.
Right.
He
Well.
only had God's forgiveness. So he had a direct,
He heard it
Relationship.
direct from God. I think it was from God himself, wasn't it? Or was it through Nathan?
Through
I
Nathan.
It
mean,
was through Nathan,
It was
okay.
God's words.
But still, um,
he had conversations with God.
Jeremiah?
talk about faith. I'm like, I mean, he killed a giant as a kid. I imagine his faith is pretty strong.
Well, it was then.
Not to mention, even Goliath wasn't his first rodeo. Didn't he carry a lion and a bear with his bare
Well,
hands?
he killed wild animals in protecting his flocks, which was part of why he felt he could handle Goliath, because he wasn't afraid of anything else, and he knew God was with him. So why be afraid of Goliath?
Well, I was gonna say, if this is later in his life, what we have seen recently is him dealing with the regrets of his own actions or inactions in terms of the affair with Bathsheba, the dealings with his own family, the having to, the way that he manipulated things to make things work. And there seemed to be a lot of regret with him, even to the point of moving his sons out of advisor roles and putting somebody else in there. If this is past all of that, has he come to terms with God on, I can't fix this, and you're going to have to fix this, and I can't fix me?
Mhm.
I think that's where it makes it sound like he's been fixed. That's where we kind of are having, I think I'm having a hard time with this. How can a guy who has messed things up as much as he's messed up say I'm righteous? That seems to be a lie.
Yeah.
Unless he has fully embraced the fact that he can't fix himself and only God can fix me. Because he does start out the whole chapter with, praising God for being his rock and his fortress and the one who saves him and all of that. So is he to a point where he has been able to put this in God's hands, my messy life in your hands, please clean me up, make me clean again.
Well, that's kind of like what Chris was saying in the last verse that you read in 25. It says, according to my cleanness in his sight. So God has given him that concept, that he's forgiven because he forgave him and that made him clean.
Yeah.
Because he obviously embraced that, like you said.
But isn't that where our society is? I'm answering my own question. I think it is where we realize that we have messed up and are either trying to cover up or we're living in shame. And we just can't get past it because we don't know how to get past it. So what do? You go to the doctor, you go to the counselor, you go get drunk, you go do this, you go do that. You try to numb yourself to the fact that you can't fix anything in your own life, let alone anybody else's life. So how do we get past that? And maybe he's onto something here where he's saying, this is the way that my heart can be clean again, is to put it in God's hands. And that's the only way I've found.
Well, isn't that really the only way for any of us?
That's where I'm getting.
Yeah, that's
That's where I'm headed.
I think, and that's the only way I can come to that same conclusion, that the only way he can justify writing this, if this is later in his life, is that he has he's accepted forgiveness. He has fully embraced the forgiveness God has offered him. And again, which is why I asked the question, are you able as an individual to fully accept that what you did has been forgiven? Things you have done has been forgiven? Or do you continue to carry guilt feelings around with you to your detriment? I personally, I find that a hard thing to do. And I think most people do.
I actually think that's Satan working in your life, trying to remind you of your past, trying to shame you.
Yeah.
And every time I do get those feelings like that, I always remind him of his future. Okay,
Yeah.
because he loses. He's
Right,
already lost.
right.
So that's kind of the way I.
Okay, good. I like that. Yeah. Jeremiah?
Earlier, I heard someone say, unless you wrote this when he was 5, first thing I thought was, it's possible. Weirder things have happened in the Bible.
Yeah, Mozart was writing music when he was 3, so.
Well, it says in 22 verse 1, David sang the song of the Lord when he was delivered from the hand of Saul.
Yeah.
So it would have been pre-Bathsheba, if that makes a difference.
Well, yeah, that's one of the, it says, delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul, but it doesn't say how soon after
Right. Sure.
being delivered from the hand of Saul. That would seem to indicate if you wrote it when he was fairly young, but
Yeah.
we just don't know. But
It's oddly placed, if that's the case.
yeah, one commentator actually pointed out, kind of referred to most of these last few chapters in this book as kind of an appendix, really, more than just the actual book. They're kind of an odd assortment of, chronologically, an odd assortment of stories that they kind of plugged in there because they didn't know where else to
Coming to
put
the
it.
end of his life, so is this just a reflection?
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I got. Anybody got any closing thoughts or? Yeah, Jeremiah?
God is good.
Yes,
All the time.
All the time?
all the time.
Good.
All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll be on our way. Dear God, thank you for your word. Maybe we don't know all the answers, but you do. So make it clear to us. Help us to take from this what we need to learn, what we need to take to heart. Be with us this week. Keep us all safe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
So are we ready for next week?
We are
You're welcome.
David's Mighty Men.
The day
to us. You just put that right over
Just,
top of, yeah,
That was my goal.
but I can't see what I'm doing either. So maybe we ended the stream